Thank you for staying with us. Hope you are enjoying the time we're spending with you and that you are spending with us. Now, let's talk about corruption in public service. A new report just released by the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics in collaboration with the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime said the Nigerian public officials received nothing less than 721 billion naira in bribes last year. According to the report, Corruption in Nigeria Patterns and Trends published by the NBS on Thursday, the 721 billion naira paid in bribes amounted to about 0.35% of Nigeria's GDP. According to the survey, the average cash bribe was 8,284 naira, an increase from an average 5,754 in 2019. The report indicates that 56% of Nigerians, you and I, interface with a public official in 2023, down from 63% in 2019. What does that suggest? Let's have a conversation this morning with Olusegun Elemo, who is Executive Director, Paradigm Leadership Support Initiative. Thanks for joining us this morning. He joins us virtually, by the way. Thank you for joining us this morning, Mr. Elemo. Well, this is one of those issues that you have been taking up in your advocacy initiatives and all of that, particularly the fact that it is public service. That is what makes it a little more concerning. What was your impression, initial impression, when you heard of this report?
Well, the first thing that jumped at me, and thank you again, Ayo, for inviting me. The first thing that jumped at me is it's also the fact that inflation has impacted every other thing, including bribing. Just like you quoted, the average cost of bribing as at 2019, 4 years ago, was about 5,000 thereabouts, and now it's moved upward 8,000 plus. So you can see that as inflation is affecting the cost of living, it's also affected the cost of bribing. So,
Mr. Elemo, I don't know what to make of that. I don't know what to make of that. So there's now inflation on bribery. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, absolutely. But that's just on a lighter note. I think the most important thing is also that there are positives from the report, given that, for instance, in 2019, 61% of Nigerians, had contact with public officials, whereas as of 2023, when this survey is assessing, only 56%, had contact with public officials. That's an indication that more and more Nigerians, are now, having less and less contact with public officials, perhaps maybe as a result of digitization of public services and public utilities, which of course should have impact on the level of bribes that are now being given or taken by public officials or citizens, as the case may be. But like I said, when you now factor in inflationary issues, then you get that marginal increase that between 5,000 and 8,000.
Well, it's one of the things that stands out for me in all of this, first of all, is that it is public service. 721 billion naira. I don't know what, I can't imagine, or rather, maybe I should put it this way. I can only attempt to imagine how greatly that will affect a micro, small, or medium enterprise if they were to cascade those monies in there. How significantly does this impact public service? I'm asking that in the light of the fact that, okay, maybe I should ask you, how does it happen? Maybe because I don't interface with public officials as such, at least not for business. Does this, so a good number of people will be wondering, How does public service corruption happen? People hear that public service officials, civil servants are corrupt, and they just take it hook, line, and sinker without even, interrogating it. So how does this happen? Just so people have an understanding.
Well, I'll thank you very much, and I bet you do interact with these issues as well as myself and every average Nigerian. Mind you, the report also acknowledged the fact that much of these issues happened in urban areas and with more educated people. And I'll give you the dynamics. For instance, when you look at application for international passports, recall that it was after 2023 when the current president was sworn in and appointed the current Minister of Interior that he then started some reform that then opened up the digitization process for passports application. Prior to that time, you and I know how difficult it is to get your passports. We had Nigerians from home and abroad who complained bitterly on how it is to apply for international passports and what goes on within that process. And I can tell you, my own story as every other Nigerian can tell you. But now we know, I acknowledge that things are getting better and the data is showing that things are getting better. But that's just one of it, international passport. So you want to apply and then there is no seamless process for you to apply digitally. You have to interface with an immigration officer who then tells you that this is the official rate, but you have to pay so amount of money to get your file in and somebody to look after your file and all that. And then you end up paying double or triple or quadruple of the amount that is officially requested. Then again, when you talk about application for driver's license, before now, I know that things have marginally improved in terms of application for driver's license, but there's still a whole lot that is happening within that space. So that's another way by which Nigerians pay bribe. And perhaps maybe when we go deep into this conversation, you will see, how the data is now throwing up some of these issues. Affirming my position on these things. And again, when you look at the number of checkpoints that you interface with on a daily basis, road safety checkpoints, police checkpoints, VIO checkpoints, and all of those checkpoints are some of it are for efficiency, some of it are for applying the rule of law and ensuring that people comply with regulations. But many of it also are about extorting Nigerians. So, and that's another way by which Nigerians pay bribe. Another one is this issue of application for yellow fever vaccination card. I've interfaced in that space as well, and I know that many Nigerians have also interfaced in that space. And that's why I mentioned earlier, and the report also said that it happened more in urban areas and with, slightly educated people. And those are the kinds of people that access these kinds of services. Also, of course, there are poor Nigerians who also have their own share of the issue.
Well, and you may freely speak to the data whenever you need, but I'm trying to look at this particular issue in the light of the Supreme Court judgment. Forgive me for going there. Now there will be a lot more money for the local government administrations to spend. And do you see the figures getting better as a result of this autonomy of the local government administrations, where the officials will now be able to do everything that they need to do without needlessly extorting the people to whom they have to offer services? I speak particularly in the light of what you just said. Now, people go to the local government areas where they are, and all they want is just to get the basic healthcare services that are promised them, primary health care, inoculation and all those things, but then they still have to go literally through the eye of the needle sometimes. So do you see this new wave making any difference in that regard?
Well, I think it's a mixed feeling, really. On the one hand, you want the local government to have the autonomy. on the other hand, you are wondering what they're going to do with it. And I think, yes, the fears are there. We have to face our fears and ensure that, yes, since we're running a constitutional democracy, we allow the process to take its course, but then we put an eye on those who are managing public resources at that level. I don't think it's going to be automatic. I think there has to be some sort of vigilance on the part of citizens and other accountability watchdogs. I think the accountability mechanism for local government administration needs to be well scrutinized and tightened properly. Currently, there are a lot of loopholes. Nobody is watching over them. Very little oversight. And I think that we need to scale that up, especially because they will now have control over their resources now. Before now, we've always held the governors accountable for what's happening at the local government level, and that's not the proper way to run a federal system. But now that the Supreme Court has given that judgment, very laudable one, I think that we now need to focus on how governance is being undertaken at that level of government, and then the accountability mechanisms that are in place. For instance, what procurement rules should they follow in awarding contracts? What services are they responsible for? And how should citizens and other watchdog bodies take a look at what's happening at that level? And again, talking about access to services, really, this issue of bribery and, well, I would call it some mini corruption, because we can talk about the grand scale corruption, and we can always go there. This issue of bribery, yes, 721 billion at stake in a particular year. But then when you look at it in terms of priority for citizens, it's the fourth biggest problem for Nigerians, bigger than healthcare. And what does that mean? And this is in relation to the question that you asked, that people will now have to go to their local government to access some of these services. In reality, it is that Nigerians, on the average, prefer to get sick than to be extorted. That's what this data is showing, that they prefer to get sick and go about themselves and sort themselves out than to get it. So because they worry more about extortion, they worry more about corruption in accessing some of these services. And for instance, in relation to the local government, someone wants to just go and collect local government attestation to be able to go through some documentation process, whether in relation to international passports or even driver's license or any other thing, or even higher institutions admission. You realize how much difficult it is to even access your local government attestation. You have to literally pay bribe to access some of these things. And then the other issue is also, like I mentioned earlier, about the police and the FRSC. You would realize that because some of the activities of the FRSC, particularly in relation to access to driver's license and some of those fees that they are responsible for collecting, you realize that the digitization process that has occurred in that space has now reduced the human interface between public officials of the FRSC and Nigerians, and that has now limited to an extent, potential collection of a bribe or taking or giving of bribe. In reality, is that the numbers, what the data from the UNODC and MBS report is showing, is that there are more people paying bribe to police than they are to FRSC, and it's very simple. Number one, you know that the police on the checkpoint, they are armed, so you literally have very few options. You either give, and you probably don't want to say no, especially if it's at night. So you are compelled to pay that bribe. And then there's no digitization process. Well, how do you even digitize the...
Anyway, and I know there are a number of other things to say about this. My apologies, Mr. Elemo, but, one of the things that really does get to me is, don't we have processes, Mr. Elemo, that can ensure that these things don't happen? A number of policemen would probably wonder, and maybe those who are still in office and are authorities over policemen, or those who are not, who say being a policeman can sometimes be an embarrassment because the bad eggs seem to take the shine off of the good ones. So aren't there mechanisms? And you've also spoken about road safety, which we've had occasion to try to curtail time and time again. Don't we have mechanisms that can curtail these activities, especially in the public service? Isn't that what the Servicom was supposed to achieve, at the federal level? What's your understanding of all of that?
Well, there are mechanisms that curtail those excesses, really. The question is whether we follow through with implementing the regulations that guide some of these actions. And I'll give you an example. For instance, in the case of the police, where there are the police is not really responsible for collecting any fees, except to ensure adherence to the rule of law. And by that, it constitutes checkpoints. It just undertakes certain obligations in ensuring that people adhere to the rule of law. So in doing that, you don't expect a police officer to request bribe because you are not responsible for collecting any fee anyway. You are not offering any service that require the average citizens to pay directly to you. So those are the issues. But in that case, how do you do it? In the case of the FRSC, for instance, which is responsible for collecting certain fees, those processes have now been digitized. Even though there are still a few administrative bottlenecks that still allows for bribe taking and bribe giving, but you see that large people now see that, there's a process by which I apply for my driver's license and all of that, and then I can follow through that process, and that limits bribe giving and bribe taking. But for police, it's different. The only thing you can do is perhaps maybe to introduce some technology, that place some extra oversight on police at checkpoints or police officers individually, perhaps maybe the introduction of body cameras, and then following through and ensuring that where there are breaches, those who are found culpable are actually made to pay for it.
Well, for which reason I understand that the police is one of the things that we hear that they're saying is, look, we want people who can be trained, and which is perhaps, according to the police, the crux of the matter between the police management of the police and the Police Service Commission. But that's for the police. So one other question that comes to mind now, Mr. Elemo, is that some Nigerians are refusing to pay bribes. That report says one of the reasons is that 23% of them says is because they can't afford what's being asked. Some are afraid of engaging in any illegal transaction. Some says it was the right or moral thing to do. Some says they had no other option. They had other options of getting what they wanted done. But so the question then would be, Mr. Elemo, this is the occurrence now. But then there are those who are giving this bribe. There are those who are literally held by the jugular that they pay or they don't get, their way. Businesses are lost if people do not pay, particularly when the goods are perishable. Where do we go from here? How do we ensure that we can break down this entire process such that we are not identified as fantastically corrupt anymore? We are an upright nation, an upright people.
Well, I think the Minister for Digital Economy, now have more work to do. And I know that he's introduced certain initiatives and currently they're working on the National Policy on Artificial Intelligence and how to digitize, government, functions generally at large scale. And I think that's the way to go. For instance, earlier during this program, we talked about the number of people that are now interacting with public officials. It's reduced from 61% to 53% to 56%. You need to reduce it even further. Perhaps we bring it maybe in another 4 years when this assessment will be carried out. Maybe we should be targeting something around 30, 25%. By that singular act, you would realize that the number of Nigerians that are prone to bribe giving would then reduce drastically. Now, because of the digitization process, to many of the services that Nigerians, particularly the elites and those in urban settlements, have to access, you realize that, for instance, 42%, refused to pay the bribe. 21% had other alternative. 23% were forced to pay because there was 23% said they couldn't afford it. Perhaps maybe if they could afford it, perhaps maybe some of them would have paid or not. But you could see the numbers. So the beauty is that if we digitize government functions, services, and all of that, you will have less and less people interfacing with public officials, and by extension, you have less and less people, prone to bribe giving. I think that's the way to go. And like I said, the Minister for Digital Economy, does have a lot of work to do in that regard.
Well, I know you have to run, and there are many other issues to raise with you, but perhaps in coming days we'll have a more robust conversation on this particular matter. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Mr. Olusegun Elemo is the Executive Director of PLSI, Paradigm Leadership Support Initiative. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me.
When we return, let's talk about how your mental health is or is not affected by the mental health of your young adult. We'll be right back.